What's going on, guys?
You guys want to take it?
Go for it. Yeah, I mean, we're good. Thank you for inviting us on. Really appreciate that. Thank you. Going good.
Sorry, just going to say, I'm super duper happy to be here. I love the name of your podcast. Literally, as soon as I discovered it, I was like, that's amazing.
We were shocked it wasn't taken.
That's what I was. Yo, that's what I thought. As soon as I Googled it, I was like, there's got to be like 30 of these, right? But no, apparently not.
Apparently not.
God bless you guys. I'm jealous.
Well, I guess a good place to start would be, kind of telling each of us a little bit about your guys' selves and how you guys came together to form your podcast.
You want to take it, Leroy?
I'll take it. We've been homies for a while now, so mostly like online stuff just because I am based in Australia. So yes, I'm
What time is it for you?
It's noon. It's 12:04 at the moment.
Oh wow.
Monday afternoon. Yeah. So I'm over here.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, exactly. So we sort of found together through sort of various DSA, Twitter type of things. I know in my organizing and stuff like that, and like I guess the center of my ideology always centers around like my Puerto Rican identity and fighting for socialism, independence of Puerto Rico, because as we all know, Puerto Rico is a colony of the United States. Sort of found these guys who are brothers, and I was sort of inquiring generally out into the universe. Oh, like, what's the process of starting sort of a Puerto Rican group, I guess, within the framework of a DSA type of thing? Met these guys, met a bunch of other fellow Puerto Ricans with similar mindsets. We started sort of a group chat that we envision as being sort of a actual working group towards certain things that we want to accomplish. Didn't quite work out that way, but it was good to connect with other like-minded Puerto Rican folks in the diaspora. The diaspora is the proper pronunciation.
Yeah, Gavin.
In the diaspora. And on the island as well. Exactly.
Yeah, you fucked it up bad. We don't even need to go back to that.
Nah, it's all good. It's all good.
We love you, buddy. It's okay.
Thanks, guys. Appreciate it.
But yeah, so that's sort of evolved. We sort of kind of grew our ideology and grew towards a struggle, an organized struggle towards, developing an independence. Thought, I suppose, among the diaspora Puerto Ricans in the United States and abroad, because obviously I'm in Australia. And over time, like, I was always really impressed with these two guys because they both have very distinct personalities.
Don't know why.
That's a low bar, my friend.
I know. No, but T has this weird, like, esoteric sort of personality, especially when he posts, which I always found like really fascinating. Like, he'll relate everything back to like 13th century fucking like Franciscan monks or whatever.
Yeah, he's got the hood for the monk thing, man. Like, mysterious.
That's what I'm saying.
It's a whole vibe.
I mean,
yeah,
all right.
No, 100%. And then Austin has this like encyclopedic, whatever the word is. No, I'm mispronouncing
encyclopedic.
Things.
Yeah, we're all fucking
that one
today.
Hey, man, that's the Vanguard way.
Exactly.
Yeah, to slur your words. Gives a shit.
Exactly. But he has the encyclopedic sort of knowledge of things that are going on in Latin America. And for the three of us, like, our ideology sort of and our worldview stems from that, like building a socialism internationally, an international socialism, but rooted in, I guess, our identity and our, I guess, background as, being from the American continents. And one thing led to another. And I think we were joking around like back and forth, me and Austin, and it was like, oh, Latin American podcast when? And then it was sort of like, are we going to do this? Is it serious? And then Machete Mate was born.
Right on.
And also, first, I should apologize if my Wi-Fi fucks up at any point. So just throwing that out there.
No big deal. Indie media.
But exactly. So to piggyback on what Leroy just said, I think one of the biggest reasons that we felt it was important to start this podcast was because of what we would perceive to be a dearth of good English language content on Latin American politics and culture and news. I think we've noticed anybody who is bilingual would be able to tell you there's a massive disconnect in the way Spanish language right-wing politicians present themselves in Spanish as opposed to presenting themselves in English, because they know they're speaking to an English speaking United States audience and they can lie about shit, right? So we found it important to be able to have more media that sets the record straight in English for people who can't speak Spanish. And I think for me personally, a big moment that led to me wanting to do this, and it was literally the conversation that Leroy was referring to. I was in London canvassing for Jeremy Corbyn when he was running last year during the end of the year. My biggest takeaway from being in London and how they did Jeremy Corbyn was the lack of left-wing media. We need more left-wing media. The way the media swarmed, like being there in London and going like door to door to average people and having average people say things like, oh, you know, yeah, you know, I used to vote Labor. I like I just don't like Jeremy. I just don't like Jeremy. Right. And it's because of the media. Right.
Yeah.
Which is why my takeaway was, no, we need more left-wing podcasts, which is why I fuck with what you guys are doing. We need more of this, more left-wing media, I think was definitely my inspiration.
You're so correct about Corbyn, man. Like the way he was just tarred and feathered in the media and for no specific reason, and not completely regardless of the cooked up charges of anti-Semitism, which is a whole other discussion, but they just completely made him out to be this ineffectual, like lame leader, completely contrary to reality.
Yeah. And just to kind of go deeper into one of the things that you brought up, you said that immediately after I heard you guys, we started this conversation, I started thinking, I was like, damn, you know, like in America, it's so hard to get good information about Puerto Rico. Like I'm going to sound like such a fucking dunce on this podcast because, you know, I'd like the information that you do get about Puerto Rico, if you look for it, it's like, oh yeah, Puerto Rico voted for statehood. You know, like that happened in November. And you're like, okay, that's weird. Nobody talked about it. Like nobody interviewed, like no, you don't know. Like the last time Puerto Rico got big coverage in America, it was obviously the hurricane, and that was a complete disaster. And you know, it's obviously still a problem that's not getting addressed. But yeah, I just wanted to you know, just echo that because you know, even you see, you know, nominally, like as a leftist look, and you know, you want to have solidarity with these people who have been just completely shafted, right? And you look at your, you know, the United States, and you know, we're still colonizing. You know, we're still, you know, in the midst of all of the things that we reflect on and think, oh fuck, how shitty were we back then? Like, no, this is what we're doing now. And so, yeah. So I you know, echoing, you know, the sentiment you had, but I just think what you guys are doing is just very important. Gavin and I don't speak any other languages, so we're at the mercy of people like you to do the heavy lifting for us.
No, you're good. And like you talk about the narrative around statehood and the way people kind of promote it. How many people that don't follow Puerto Rican issues would know that the statehood party, this is a pro-Trump party. This is
that's
a
what
radical...
our friend Carlos, who's friend Carlos, who's also has a lot of family and I believe is from Puerto Rico as well. You know, he talked about that, how it's a much more conservative movement than it ever gets played in America, you know, United States, because you know, people don't like, they don't ever actually interview the Puerto Ricans. They don't ever actually interview the politicians at all. They just sum it up as these people want freedom.
And that's also ironic because here in America, when it is brought up by people on the left or in the Democratic Party, it's often like, oh, well, if Puerto Rico becomes a state, then we'll get 2 more senators and it'll be more Democrats in control. So that's extra ironic.
A good friend of ours, I was going to say quickly, a friend of ours, Paul, who was part of the Independentist Party of Puerto Rico, who ran the city council of San Juan, put it best. Puerto Rico is essentially a brown Alabama. Remember, our resident commissioner, who's a non-voting member of Congress in Washington, she was a Latino for Trump. So she's a Republican, deeply Trumpian, all those guys. And the thing is, what the mistake that a lot of people make is they try to superimpose US-based electoral politics into Puerto Rico. Like the PMP, which is a criminal organization, is a bipartisan party. So within that statehood, that corrupt party, there are Democrats and there are Republicans all working towards the same goal. So basically, somehow this, you know, evil Trumpian group of people found common ground with, you know, the good liberals. You know what I mean? Yeah. And that's one thing we need to keep in mind as well.
Usually how they start wars.
Yeah, and that's kind of what I love about the Puerto Rican political party system. And I don't know, this is like your line, T. So if you want to about.
So the Puerto Rican party system is a lot more honest than the U.S. party system. In Puerto Rico, you have the state, you know, for lack of a better term, the statehood party, the sovereigntist party, kind of like the status quo party, essentially.
The annexationist party.
The colony party.
Right. And then you have the independence party. In the statehood party, you have both Democrats and Republicans. You have everyone from Trumpian Republicans to like neoliberal Democrats of the, you know, I don't know,
Clinton ilk.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes.
Exactly. And it's something you mentioned, like they voted for statehood. I have to ask, whenever someone brings that up, I always have to ask which vote, because there's been six
multiple, right?
There's been 6 of these, I believe, about 5 or 6, and like I might be messing that up, but
That's right. Yeah.
So which vote for statehood?
Right.
And honestly, I don't, the votes are really just kabuki theater. It's kayfabe, it's pro wrestling kayfabe. But this conversation can't be discussed without talking about the systematic oppression of independence activists who, for decades, this debate even on whether or not Puerto Ricans want to be a state or not, it isn't occurring in like a level playing field, if that makes sense.
And also, it must be said, like when the statehood party, like the thumbs are always on the scale, like in the amount of funding and support that they get from institutions within the United States, it's infinite compared to the lack of resources that people within the actual Puerto Rican Independence Party have. And when I think about the plebiscites as well, like you got to remember, or people got to realize, in Puerto Rico, Puerto Ricans, they actually pride themselves on their civic duty, right? As far as voting, right? Puerto Ricans typically have a very high voter turnout. The reason a lot of people either boycott or just don't give a fuck about these status referendums is precisely because there's been like fucking 6 of them, right? How can you tell Puerto Ricans, oh yeah, okay, so this plebiscite, it's non-binding, but yeah, we promise we're going to work something out with Congress if you vote in it. It has to be binding. Tell people. This is why one of the things we try
nothing
to push,
the U.S. government does is binding, right?
Bro, exactly. And this is why something people are pushing now is a constituent assembly, right? Or a status assembly people are talking about. A binding status assembly to be formed on the island so that Puerto Ricans themselves can make an actual informed decision on the status. A comparison I love to make is and this is a kind of a rough comparison I should say, but in the late 1980s in Chile, right? The Pinochet referendum.
Yeah.
The Pinochet
87?
referendum. Yeah, 87. The Pinochet referendum that voted Pinochet out had equal allocation of media resources to both ones. Site or status assembly that does not allow for equal allocation of resources to both statehood or independence or any option is bullshit, right? They are intentionally rigging these votes. So that way they can go to people in the United States and say, oh, you see, there's this big wide mandate for statehood in Puerto Rico, even though that is the opposite of the case. The statehood governor right now, the governor who just got elected, won with 33% of the vote? Yep. That means nearly 70% of the population did not vote for that motherfucker. So it's a whole thing.
Yeah, it's totally crazy that they will turn around and say, well, not enough people voted in this election. But then it's like, if the results of the election aren't going to matter anyway, then like you're saying, why would you come out to vote in the first place? It's so ridiculous and so stupid that we have that going on over and over and over again. I am wondering because, and I didn't really realize that it's very funny that you described Puerto Rico as like a brown Alabama. And that also reminds me of like how a lot of like Cuban Americans and Cuban immigrants and such are very right wing, and they actually do not embrace at all some of the leftist history of their people or culture. And I'm just wondering what the response is from maybe some people that or even your family members to your guys' explicitly leftist Marxist podcast and project here at Machete Mate.
Who wants to take this one?
Well, I mean, Leroy is the family man. Leroy's the family man.
I'm the family man. But it's funny because I grew up in Florida, so I'm very, very acutely familiar with the Cuban American population in Miami. One thing I like to call it is the Miami Industrial Complex. So Miami is the capital of Latin America. If you had to pick a centralized capital for Latin America, it's Miami. So anytime there's a coup and that coup gets overthrown by the good guys, by like leftist governments, and they all flee, they all go to Miami. So we talked about yesterday on the episode that we dropped this morning that Áñez, so the coup president of Bolivia, Bolivia at some point she's going to be in Miami. All these motherfuckers end up in Miami, right? And what we need to understand as well, that's institutional. So you have all these right-wing think tanks, all these right-wing groups funding, like throwing money at that to foster this sort of dissent. And you have all these people like the Marco Rubios, the Ted Cruzes of the world who are, Cuban American. We left, because of the revolution. Marco Rubio left before the revolution. You know what I mean? A lot of these people are like the bourgeois, petty bourgeois that were kicked out of Cuba, and now they're coming coaching the pearls that, oh, my grandfather this, my grandfather that.
Yeah.
When if their entire worldview was about, top-down oppression of people, they should be standing solidarity with Puerto Ricans. And what you see that's often not the case. Like they don't give a shit about us because they have this idea that they're the real Hispanics. They're this. We're lucky because we're part of the United States, even though we've been colonized for the last 500 fucking years. You know what I mean?
Yeah, for sure.
And it's funny, I guess.
Surprise, surprise. Puerto Rico and all these countries are diverse places with diverse beliefs and diverse ideas on how they want to organize their societies.
Wait, what? Hold on 1 second. Can you?
It's crazy.
Yeah, these people have a fucking robust range of ideas. Crazy, but one of the things that I did want to pick up, we talked briefly about the problem of obviously election hoax and putting thumbs on scales. Do you guys have any thoughts on what's going on in Ecuador right now?
Do we?
Awesome.
Let's take this. Okay, yeah.
You go.
Oh goodness, yeah.
There's no good English coverage on this. I'm excited that you guys can read in Spanish because I'm looking for a wave of information here.
So, oh goodness. So the first thing I would definitely recommend to people is to listen to the most recent Machete interview that we did with a journalist in Ecuador, as well as one of the actual election observers that was there in Quito for this election. That's a good one. And we just did an analysis that we literally dropped this morning. So that's a good one as well.
Oh yeah.
Oh goodness. So let me try and recap. I guess our thoughts, my thoughts. I'll allow. Oh, okay. Nice. I like what's happening on screen right now. You see, this is a professional podcast. We have a clown show on ours. So we're learning shit as we see you guys do that.
But we keep it real. We keep it real Latin American. Like try to cut our costs and shit. So
yeah, exactly. Check it out. You already know. So anyway, so in Ecuador. Oh shit. Okay. So it's very I think the number one thing to think about what's going on in Ecuador. It's very nuanced, right? It's not black and white. It's not black and white. To me, what seems very clear is that the right wing in Latin America is coalescing together to complete what I would describe, and once again, Leroy or T, you can chime in with how you would look at it, but with what I would describe as a political hit job against Andrés Arauz and the Union for Hope, and more broadly the Correístas, or the 21st century socialists, people may refer to them as. I think that, I look back to the super secret meeting, right, that the head of the OAS, Luis Almagro, held with the soon-to-be former president of Ecuador.
Whenever I hear the name the OAS, I'm like, where is this coup happening?
Oh yeah, that should send chills down your spine. If you know the AOS is involved, I go back to what Fidel Castro called them, the Department of the Colonies, right? It's the U.S. Department of Colonies. That's what the OAS is. So if they're involved, the bullshit's going down. So with Ecuador, Andrés Arauz, the Union for Hope candidate, he was the faraway vote getter, right? There was a bit of confusion about who came in second place. And I'd say that's where a lot of the kind of fuckery started developing. There was a conflict between Yaku Perez of the Pachakutik Party, which is an indigenous party, and Guillermo Lasso, who's the neoliberal banker candidate. Right.
I heard that the indigenous guy may have American funding. I read that in English, though. So I don't know.
Oh yeah, buddy. Let me. and here's why this is a complex.
Hold your horses.
Yeah.
Here's why
sorry.
Here's why this is a complicated issue. Okay, so I'll talk a little bit about the history of Pachakutik and the indigenous organizations within Ecuador, because it's really important. So CONAE, which is the Confederation of Indigenous Organizations in Ecuador, is one of the most militant and well-organized indigenous organizations in South America, right? They have a reputation for being very well organized. They were formed in the 80s, right? Their big moment of initial prominence was, I want to say, 1991, when they had their what they called their indigenous uprising against kind of the rising neoliberalism or rising neoliberal policies that were really taking effect in the region during the early 90s and the fall of the Soviet Union and the end of the Cold War, or however the fuck we want to phrase that. And CONAE, very similarly to how the indigenous movements in Bolivia did, formed a political party in 1995. This political party was Pachakutik, right? This is the indigenous political party. It came out of the militantly socialist, plurinationalist, indigenous movements. So that's important context when we're talking to think about when we're talking about Pachacútec and Conaé, in my opinion, right? So Yaku Perez is the candidate that was nominated by Pachacútec to run for president. For me, and once again, Leroy and T, feel free to say something else if you want, but for me, Yaku Perez is a clear opportunist. Yaku Perez is a bad actor. Yaku Perez never saw a right-wing coup he didn't like. Yaku Perez never saw a left-wing government that he didn't want to call corrupt, right? And for that, I think it's the worst thing that the Ecuadorian left could be doing right now is feeding those divisions, right? Is trying to make this some weird Pachacútec versus the Correístas sort of thing. I think Andrés Arauz, who once again, he was the top vote getter. He's the 21st century socialist candidate. I think his rhetoric throughout all of this has been spot on, which is that he has emphasized the common ground between the Union for Hope and Pachacútec. There's a really good English language Democracy Now! Interview that Andrés Arauz did this week that I strongly recommend.
Yeah, I actually watched that.
Out. Exactly. Yeah. He is so charismatic and he speaks better English than I do. Like
it was great. And they talked about Korea as well.
Yeah. Oh yeah. All that. It's a really good interview. And he emphasized, he said, I think we should, I'm paraphrasing, something to the effect of, I think we should be celebrating that the Ecuadorian people have voted 70% in favor of plurinationalism, 70% against neoliberalism, right? And I think that's the rhetoric that people should be approaching, right? We shouldn't be feeding into this narrative of Pachacútec versus UNES versus the Union for Hope, because they can coexist. They are natural allies, right? They're natural allies. Evo Morales, once again, who obviously Bolivia, Bolivia. Evo campaigned with Arauz, right? And I think Leroy's got something to say, so I'll yield to you, Leroy. I've said enough.
No, 100%. And just to piggyback off of that, one thing that Arauz did masterfully is linking those struggles, understanding it's, plurinationalism against neoliberalism, against imperialism, against the global north that's coming to fuck our societies up, right? And one thing that we see as well is that CONAE, being the militant and principled group that they are, when the meetings were happening behind the scenes between Lasso, who's that neoliberal banker candidate, and Yaku Perez, Isa, so who's the representative of the more like militant sort of labor indigenous side, not necessarily like the electoral side, came out and said, there wouldn't be, this isn't a paraphrasing again, we're not showing that this isn't a situation where we're in agreement, because if we're in agreement, our militants would be in the streets. So basically disavowing any notion that they're on board with that meeting, which was, again, I think is important because they do need to keep that separate. And that, again, reinforces the idea that Yaku Perez is an opportunist. And again, something else I want to make clear, I'll make clear on the episode as well. We can call Yaku Perez an opportunist. We can talk about that he's given up the game and everything. But to bring in any idea of, any notion of his indigeneity into question, bring anything like that, bringing in racism into this is disgusting, because we're seeing that as well. We're seeing supposed leftists coming out because, oh, he's a leftist, oh, he's not even indigenous, oh, he's a traitor, blah 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 blah. Let's not do that, because racism in any form is fucking disgusting, right? But that's just my 2 cents on what Austin was saying. So Austin, if you want to pick it back up.
No, you're good. If there's any final point that I would want to drive home on this, it's what our homie from the Progressive International, who was an election observer down there, said, which is we need to be extraordinarily clear. There were no signs of fraud, right? Fundamentally. Yaku Perez has been talking about, oh my God, there was fraud. According to all the election observers, there were no signs of fraud.
Wow, right? That sounds really funny. I wonder if I've heard somebody else use that line before after an election.
Yeah, sounds familiar, right? Yeah.
But Austin, like
I
you said,
remember where I read that. When I'm fucking
like you said, Austin, there's voter suppression, but there wasn't voter fraud. Clear difference.
Yeah, and the reason it sounds familiar is because the United States, just like Ecuador and Bolivia, is an American country.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
Well, yeah, we really appreciate your guys' foreign policy perspective, and that's one of my favorite aspects of your guys' show. As I mentioned to anyone listening, definitely check out the MACHETE podcast. There's a lot of great discussions about this kind of foreign policy, especially in the Latin American region. So yeah, really appreciate that insight you guys are bringing. Another question I had for you is, you mentioned DSA earlier, and the fact that you guys kind of got connected through DSA or related groups or organizations, and we were also talking with Matt T from the Midwest Socialist Podcast, who's also a comrade of your guys' show. So shout out to Matt if you're watching. Hope you're doing well, man. But the last time he was on, we discussed a little bit the recent kind of debate, especially on the online left, around the merits of DSA and whether or not it's effective to strategize or work with or try to reform the Democratic Party. I'm wondering if you guys have any perspective on that. Clearly you guys are involved with the DSA to some extent, so you probably think it's the correct path, but I'm just wondering if you could speak to that debate at all and your position on it.
Who wants to take this one?
You want to take it, Mr. NPC?
Well, in my line, so this is obviously a question that's raging across the left, right? And definitely within DSA. My line is a very simple one, right? Which is, I'm not keen on purity politics, right? Mm-hmm. What I am keen on is material change. My very simple philosophy is run as a Democrat only if you need to. If you are in a situation where you're in a local race and it's nonpartisan, or there's some sort of, the municipal election and you don't have to run as a Democrat, don't. Yep. However, myself, I'm based in Richmond, Virginia. You can't do shit if you don't run as a Democrat. And that's just a fact. The Democrats and the Republicans in Virginia, they might as well be arms of government, right? For all intents and purposes. I think something that people mistake a lot about our form of government in the United States is that it is a two-party state. And people seem to think that two-party state means multi-party state. No, it doesn't. It means two-party state. It means you can't organize outside the two parties because they will crush you, right? And I think T has something to add to that.
Yeah, I mean, so two points. Number one, I think I can speak for the fellas here that we're not all that interested in like electoral politics, political organizing necessarily. We're not opposed to it, but it's not necessarily something that's in our wheelhouse. Secondly, I think people have kind of a limited understanding of what electoral politics can mean because it's much more than running a candidate for an election. There's things like ballot initiatives. There's things like I think people should have a much more expansive understanding of what that means. And like Austin was saying, there's a lot of races where party affiliation they're nonpartisan by law. So the question of like, do we take over the Democrat Party or not is irrelevant. If you're interested in electoral politics, I'm not going to try to tell you what to do because again, it's not my thing. But again, like, I'm not going to try to tell them what to do, but like, I think that's the avenue to go. Just have a more expansive view, not just of electoral politics, but political strategy in general. It's a kitchen sink approach we need. Throw everything in the kitchen sink, see what sticks. What works in one place, do that. What works in another place, do that. That's really what I think comes down to. Adapt. I heard
you guys use that on the show, the kitchen sink approach. I think that's just so perfect and a great encapsulation of our philosophy here at the Vanguard as well. And we do focus on third party movements, and we do think that they have, revolutionary potential, especially when it comes to pushing the conversation, pushing the Overton window. We saw a lot of, things from Jill Stein's platform, for example, incorporated into the political mainstream in the wake of that campaign. So I certainly think there's a place for third parties, but I also certainly agree with you from a systematic perspective, from an establishment perspective, and depending on where you are, a lot of times you have to go at it from a within the Democratic Party approach too. So I think that's super important to note. And
Yeah, and just to chime in, kind of, I think that you make a good point about how this is a two-party state, right? So it's kind of like we've had other parties, yes, but it's like in order to introduce the Republicans, you had to take out the Whigs, right? So it was like it's like unless you're big enough to swallow the Democratic Party, which I think the left should obviously build to do, and at that point we can rename ourselves whatever the fuck we want, the Grilled Cheese Sandwich Party. But once everybody's on our team, then we can enact all these policies. And that's kind of the real goal anyway. At that point, what the fuck does it matter what we call ourselves? So I think you guys hit on something that's really important there. Whereas this whole inside, strategy is really important, right? But it's like just the kitchen sink metaphor, Gavin just complimented. I'll compliment it again because it is a great encapsulation of exactly what we need to be doing. It's not wrong to be working in the DSA if you have a really active DSA in your area. That being said, like, there's no fucking point for DSA to be like, fuck the Green Party. It's like, why? Like, you know, like, you guys are both fighting for healthcare. Like, you guys should sign a petition that says DSA and the Green Party both want this. That's all of these people together. Like, coalition building, I feel like, is something that we all on the left need to do a better job of, right? Because there's so much factioning, right? Because everybody's politics is personal to them if they're on the left, right? Like, this is a point of our belief system, our moral compass. Everything is rooted in, and so nobody wants to compromise on that. Yeah. And I think that that's why there is a place for people to have, like, you know, cells of whatever the fuck you want to call yourself, right? But at the end of the day, you also need to learn how to, you know, assign a common goal and work arm in arm to bring that to fruition.
Like the Rainbow Coalition that the Black Panthers are working towards, you know?
Exactly.
Definitely.
And I think I just want to jump in here real quick. I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that as leftists, as Marxists, we try to be really principled, academic, you know, really good Marxists. When if we were good Marxists, we'd be functioning within material realities, and material realities is X, Y, Z. So we need to work within that. So we could use say AOC as an example. As much as she irks us, as much as, you know, she's not a real socialist, as much as she, you know, opposes imperialist policies, she's fighting the good fight. Like, she's advancing certain ideas forward, and we need to commend her for that and protect her at all costs, like T likes to say.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that there's this big confusion. You bring up AOC because she's the perfect point. Like, it's like, why am I supposed to be more upset at AOC than I am at literally every other fucking member of Congress?
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like,
Right.
I am happy, and people can find, like, I put up a dozen clips of us, you know, fucking being pissed at AOC when she does something that we don't fucking like. But at the end of the day, like, why would you like why not? There are fucking 400 other motherfuckers that are way worse. Like, you know what I mean? Like,
Right.
like, aim your fire, like, use your ammunition effectively, right? Like,
Yo, I like to say I do my best not to punch left because there's so many motherfuckers on the right that need to be punched first.
exactly.
Now, don't get me wrong, I'm still a leftist and I break my rule from time to time, but I try my best not to punch left for those reasons.
Yeah.
I mean, fundamentally, whether we like you don't have to like someone you're organizing with, you know, a comrade and a friend, those aren't necessarily synonymous things. So it's really, I don't think it's how we feel about someone is necessarily relevant. If we're, you know, we're experiencing a number of intense social crises right now. Like, there, you know, Texas it's a tragedy right now. We need to concentrate on less on these kind of bizarre personal beefs that we might have, or, you know, my books are better than your books, you know, rather
when really we should all just be hightailing it to Cancun.
Yeah, 100%.
It's funny. Ted Cruz has always, you know, said nothing but the best things about the people of Mexico, and you know, of course, he's going to be there first in a crisis in America, right? I mean, after all of his fond rhetoric.
Exactly. And on that point as well, I saw a tweet like yesterday criticizing AOC because the only reason AOC's in Texas is to make Ted Cruz look bad. I'm like, yeah, oh my God, like, she's, you know, only doing it to improve my material conditions. Like, you know what I mean? Like,
dude, it's like, people were pissed at AOC when she stood with the workers on strike in the Bronx. I'm like, what the fuck do you want? She's just using her celebrity to bring the cameras there. Good.
Okay.
Yeah, it really is ridiculous what a stupid controversy that's become. And like, obviously we can have a nuanced conversation and call politicians out when they do things that aren't, you know, representative of our wants and demands and all of that. But like, what's this like whole industry that's popped up of, you know, trying to tar and feather her and make her seem like a sellout or all this, when in reality she is a comrade, absolutely, and she is fighting the good fight, and we do have to protect her and hopefully you know, influence her to the left going forward and not push her further towards the neoliberals she's surrounded with.
Yeah, totally. And speaking a little bit from the DSA end, like, I think being in DSA, I have been encouraged by some of the, you know, latest positions that AOC has taken, specifically in regards to Puerto Rico, right? AOC is a member of the Puerto Rican diaspora, so it's important to us in the Puerto Rican diaspora to have her as a kind of like a vocal kind of voice for, you know, diaspora leftists. For a while, it was very difficult to get AOC to commit to anything regarding Puerto Rico, anything, right? And it was very frustrating for us. last year, finally, she has committed herself to a self-determination bill within Puerto Rico that is kind of draws out the process that I discussed earlier for status assemblies. And I 100% am confident in saying the reason she is doing that, it's pressure. It's the pressure that she received from the other members of the Puerto Rican diaspora community. Everybody I know that knows her has told me she is susceptible to pressure because she is a comrade, and she just that's what comrades are for, right? To check each other, and that's how we should look at it, right? We not like, oh my God, you missed point number 10 on my purity test, you fucking neoliberal, right? It should just be, hey, do better here, right? We're comrades. We should ask ourselves to each other to do better.
Yeah,
anyways.
for sure.
Yeah,
100%. Yeah, and I think that's a great point. And obviously, I think people are, people have, real criticisms of AOC. I don't want to be reductive in that capacity. Like, sure, I wish she would come out more forcefully for Assange and whistleblowers. I wish that she would do some other things. But you're right. Like, I mean, we have to pick our battles, right? I wish Bernie Sanders would have done a lot of shit different. You know what I mean? Like, it's like I wish that. You know what I mean? Like, we praise Ed Markey on our show when he supports the Green New Deal. But I could just as easily made an hour-long segment about this dude doesn't understand Facebook censorship at all. Like, you know what I mean? It's like, but I'm not trying not to get Ed Markey out of the Senate when we finally have one established, person who's going to support the Green New Deal in the Senate. So I just think, like, you got to work with what you've got when you've got it. And obviously it's good to be aware of things. And there's nothing wrong with, having your own ethical, convictions and all those sorts of things that differ from politicians that you're going to end up voting for. Right. Because I think at the end of the day, this is all a strategy conversation, right? Because the only thing that matters is improving the material conditions for every, working class individual across the globe, and I think that and I guess one place that's good to, start this question is whenever you watch, like even a show that's trying to be like, really progressive, right? So you think about when Puerto Rico is portrayed by like, somebody that's trying to like be, charitable towards Puerto Rico, right? You get, these people are really Americans. Like these people, like you don't need your passport to come here. Like this is your land, and it's like, it doesn't ever strike me very well. And I remember even people that like, when Anthony Bourdain goes there and he's like, these people are just as American as apple pie. And I'm like, I don't think that's like exactly how these people feel. Like, and so I guess like
it's a matter of debate right now.
Yeah. So I was just going to kind of get you guys to like, I guess if you could talk about like the way that Puerto Rico's when it all progressive or people who are nominally progressive right now, obviously not, rooted leftists, but they try and talk about it as, the same way they try and like gloss over like years of chattel slavery and, Jim Crow and everything. It's like, we're friends now. Everybody's the same. We're all one, like melting pot. Let's forget the past and oppression and pretend we're starting from scratch. Like, I'm just wondering if I could get your guys' kind of response to that.
You want to take it, Leroy?
Yeah, I'll start it off. Like everything you described right there is sort of that Democrat Party liberal conception of identity politics, absent of any class analysis as well, or any analysis of the material history of Puerto Rico. Because we need to realize is that in 1898, Puerto Rico was invaded by the United States, right? Yeah. And soon after, they passed the Foraker Law, insular cases that basically rendered us, I forget what the exact term was, but it's like foreign in a domestic sense. And that the Constitution of the United States didn't necessarily apply fully to Puerto Rico. And
right, like you don't get the same trial rights in Puerto Rico.
Exactly. That's exactly right. And going back to our conversation about like plebiscites and all that stuff, those cases pretty much said that Congress has the power to do whatever it wants. So if Congress, the United States, actually wanted Puerto Rico to be a state, it can do it at any moment. If it wants us to be independent, it can make us independent at any moment. But it's not convenient to them. They just don't fucking care about it. So all this talk about, the really Americans is just regurgitating that American exceptionalist line that, we're number one. And all that is that neocon, racist, white supremacist, like conception of what America is, right? Because we need to remember as well, we like to talk about how American we were, but we weren't very American when our women were being sterilized, right? Like we weren't very American when like Dr. Cornelius Rhodes was
the guy they named the fucking Rhodes Scholarship after.
Exactly right. They were using us as specimen. You know what I mean?
A great a great English language book that covers a lot of Puerto Rico for people who might not be familiar with the history. I wasn't at all until I read this book. Daniel Immerwahr, he's a professor at Northwestern. He wrote this book, How to Hide an Empire. It's a really quick read. Gives a good cover of what happened in the Philippines. My own girlfriend's Filipino. I had no idea what was going on in the Philippines at that time. It's a great, catch up on U.S. imperialism. But sorry to interrupt you.
No, you're 100% right. And by the way, my wife's Filipino as well. So there you go. Anyway, that's besides the point. But yeah, so we have to take everything in that context, right? Wife guy, yeah, apparently. But yeah, it's all bullshit. Like, don't do that, because what that does, it erases our existence as a distinct nation. Because one thing that we like to talk about on the show is that as Puerto Ricans, we are a nation, right? We're a multi-ethnic, we're a plurinational nation. We're of African descent, some of us, indigenous descent, some of us, we're just Chinese Puerto Ricans, Arab Puerto Ricans. We are a plurinational nation, so to speak. And something that Austin likes to bring up as well, like a lot of leftists have a more nuanced conception of Palestinian liberation, of Irish liberation, but for some reason that doesn't, spill over into Puerto Rico, because at the end of the day, a lot of this is advancing imperial rhetoric. You know what I mean? That whole talk about, we're being American, we have a passport, all this shit is imperial rhetoric.
Yeah, it's all, can we make this place wide enough to turn it into a state so that when they vote, they have our fucking interests?
Yep.
Exactly right. Exactly right.
Yeah. That was the whole point of the stabilization, targeting women, poor women of color, right? To whiten the island. Let's be clear. That's exactly what the fuck was happening. And I think it's important to touch upon what Puerto Rico is to the United States legally, right? People, you say people love to say Puerto Ricans are Americans. People love to say Puerto Rico is a part of the United States. It's not, according to the own U.S. government, right? The U.S. government does not consider Puerto Rico part of the United States. Puerto Rico is a possession. It's a possession of the United States. Legally speaking, it is a distinct legal jurisdiction from what is the United States, right? Yeah. People, for whatever reason, the rhetoric, well, we know why, but the rhetoric of Democrats or other stateholders, nobody talks about that, right? They just kind of gloss over those things entirely.
It's the same category as Guam, right?
I believe so, yes. I think
technically, I mean, they're all within the same sort of concept, but I think technically it's the same sort of thing as the Northern Mariana Islands, because they're a Commonwealth. Gotcha. We're technically the Commonwealth of Puerto Rico.
Oh, Commonwealth. Gotcha.
Yeah, it really is crazy how little recognition there is.
When you say that out loud, too, it's so fucked. Anyway, sorry, Gavin.
Yeah, I was just going to say that it's just crazy how few people realize the reality of that or even consider it. Like, it's just taken for granted by so many white Americans that, we have Puerto Rico and Guam and the Virgin Islands, and these are our little colonies, or whatever you want to call it, and no one thinks about it, and we think about the age of empires as being over in a sense, but not at all.
Sorry, you can go ahead.
Well, I was just gonna say, I mean, Puerto Rico has been a colony for what, almost 5 centuries now?
1512 or some shit,
since Columbus, by the way, that long.
Yeah, exactly.
That's crazy.
Yeah,
crazy.
I mean,
well,
oh, go ahead, Gavin.
Oh, no, you're good.
Oh, yeah, I was just going to say, I mean, I didn't want to pivot too hard, and I actually, this kind of breaks a little bit from the Spanish-speaking, imperialistic realm, but I did want to, just in case you guys did have any thoughts on the matter, obviously there have been massive protests that have broken out in Haiti. Obviously, in Haiti, it was colonized by the French, but it's, proximity-wise, obviously shares an island with the Dominican Republic. Jovenel Moise, I believe is how you pronounce his name. Jovenel Moise, current president, seeking another year of his term, suspected by many of the Haitian people that this is just a way for him to extend power kind of forever, in the way that many of the US-backed dictators always do. They have this kind of faux democracy veneer until it's no longer convenient, and then they're just like, all right, to hell with it, he's an autocratic dictator. Joe Biden's administration, shocker, going ahead and getting behind him and at the tradition of all U.S. presidents. So I'm just wondering, obviously there's so many striking similarities between Haiti and much of Latin America, Central America, and how it's been exploited, and obviously the slavery element of Haiti's history. And then, Haiti's consistently been, brutalized by, colonizers for its whole history. I mean, the natural disasters as well. I don't know. I'll pass the torch to you guys and just see what thoughts you had.
One thing I like to say is that, especially when we talk about Puerto Rico, is that the concept of independence and sovereignty aren't the same thing, right? Haiti is a perfect example of that. They had the revolution in 1804. They've been ostensibly independent, but they have never been sovereign.
Only successful slave rebellion.
Exactly. And they have not been sovereign in all that time, paying back to
paying for it, yeah.
France, making them pay them reparations for all that shit, all the wealth extraction, all the labor extraction, everything. So yeah, it's absolute fucked. And Haiti represents, I think, within the revolutionary concept that we have, especially as people from the Caribbean, they're front and center of everything we believe in what we want to construct, right? This ostensibly, again, multiracial, largely Black, because that's just the population that's there, but a group of people who took it into their own hands to free themselves from the shackles. But then this is a perfect example as well of imperial powers coming in, of the power of capital, of the power of Eurocentric conceptions of what civilization should look like being imposed on a population. And what we see again is systematic oppression for hundreds of years now. You have to today. So you talked about, the earthquake. You talk about all these other things. We can talk about the Clintons putting their fucking fingers everywhere, extracting that, and blocking.
Yeah, they did that a lot of other places too.
Exactly, they did in Puerto Rico as well. So, but
Honduras.
yeah. So, but exactly. But what's going on now, like you mentioned perfectly, is there's an interim president that the Supreme Court put in, basically, shunning Moise, essentially, who has also brought up in our latest episode. Was
I fucking up how I was pronouncing that? I have no idea how to pronounce this guy's name.
Oh, I think it's Moise.
I've settled on Moise. I think it's Moise
because it's got the two. I'm not a linguist. Yeah,
Moise.
Yeah.
Austin, if you want to take it away, because you had a pretty good analysis.
Sure, I'll try and be relatively brief here. So as far as your question of, I guess, do we have thoughts on Haiti? I'd say, we have passionate thoughts on Haiti, only because Haiti, for us, especially as Puerto Ricans, to me, the goal of Puerto Rican sovereignty, as Leroy was talking about, does not end with Puerto Rican independence. Bro, I'm talking about full-on Caribbean unity, motherfucker. We want a strong state that can actually protect and defend itself. We need a united Caribbean. That's a whole nother fucking thing. That's just a way of the example of the love we have for Haiti, Caribbean brothers, so to speak.
Yeah.
So the thing to remember about modern Haiti is that I always like to start with the 1920s occupation by the United States, right? When the United States occupied Haiti for like 2 fucking decades, from like the 19-teens to the 1920s, this occupation was ostensibly through the 30s, I believe, the 19-teens to the 30s, the early 20th century. That's what we'll go with. This occupation was ostensibly to build up the Haitian police force. Now, what the fuck did that actually mean? That meant getting U.S. tentacles into the defense sector in Haiti to where they could rule Haiti in perpetuity. And that's what's happened for the last 100 years. Because the United States has had such direct influence within the Haitian military and Haitian police force, not too dissimilarly to the way they do other countries in Latin America, or the world for that matter, Haiti and Central America in the early 20th century, they were the testing ground for that strategy, which has been exported across the world now. Because of that, I will now pick up in the early 90s, the original coup d'etat against Jean-Bertrand Aristide, right, who was a leftist liberation theologian in Haiti. This was the beginning of the Clintons getting their tentacles in there, right? The bill was an important part of the Haitian coup d'etat, or at least when Aristide came back during the 90s. And the reason they're able to do this is because of how deeply entrenched they are within the Haitian military, or at least that's a big part of it, right? So now, when Biden came out and said that he was backing Moise for another year, like, don't get me wrong, like, I'm never shocked by the fucked up things the United States government can do, but even I was almost kind of taken aback, because
how do you even justify that after I mean, well, yeah, obviously you can't justify, but
it's like Moise has been historically unpopular. He's had a mass movement against him for years now. I don't know how Joe Biden or the U.S. State Department can look at Haiti and think, oh yeah, let's just back Moise for another year. It'll be okay. Like Leroy was saying, the Moise is so unpopular that the opposition contains such a large sector of Haitian civil society that they have coalesced around opposition president. If I recall correctly, his name is Joseph Messine Jean-Louis, some shit like that.
Yeah.
I think it's Joseph Messine is how he's known. And he's he's a Haitian Supreme Court judge. A Haitian Supreme Court judge is involved in this opposition. I'm kind of surprised that the Biden administration wouldn't just think, oh, okay, Moise, his time is up. Let's pick somebody else. The fact that they've stuck with Moise is so deeply racist. It's so deeply paternalistic. Just, it's Haiti. Who gives a fuck, right? Let's just deport thousands of Haitians at the same time. Who gives a fuck? Who's going to care, right? It's so paternalistic. It's disgusting the way the United States treats Haiti. And now I'm getting pissed off thinking about it. So I'll pass it off to you, Leroy.
Yeah, and just to piggyback off of that, one thing that the United States likes to do whenever they support and back coups is there's democratic support, the people support, even if it's all bullshit, even if it's a minority that support that person, not even that exists here. So they can't even bullshit off of that because that popularity doesn't exist.
Yeah. Kind of reminds me of like Bolivia, where they tried to do the coup, but they couldn't even like feign the support for it among the people. Like everyone was just like, no, like this is like they weren't able to properly orchestrate it. Yeah.
And this is why I've said for years, when people were trying to say, oh, the pink tide in Latin America is dead, haha, the right wing's coming back, I would always say, no, just wait. You want to know why the left is coming back? Because the bases they've built. Look at Bolivia. You can change the person in power. Those bases, those indigenous organizations, they don't just disappear. They're still there. They're not stupid, and they know what the fucking IMF is. And
when in Bolivia, when people saw the alternative, they quickly realized what they were missing out on, and even those that had grown up under Morales, quickly realized again what they were missing out on in his absence.
It's absolutely crucial to emphasize the importance of the institutions that these movements have built in various countries. The only reason why Mas was able to beat back the coup was because of those institutions. Now, institutions that date before Mas even existed. There is a powerful militant labor movement in Bolivia, especially. They were the backbone to the social movements. They have, I don't know if you'll recall, but there is a practice in Bolivia that goes back quite literally centuries of cutting off the major cities by the roads. This isn't just like a new tactic that came about with like cars and roads. This is literally a tactic that the people since the Inca, exactly. The social movements built in Venezuela, the commune system, is the backbone of the revolution there. This is how you build change, building these institutions. They don't just mobilize like the millions to the streets. We happen to see the images, the dramatic moments on our screens. If we ever, if Americans even bother paying attention to Latin America, it's scenes of like, mass demonstrations. Nobody thinks about the decades of work and the decades of blood, sweat, and tears that went to building centuries, yeah, to build the capacity to have those dramatic moments that we see. This is and it's exactly what you said, Austin. The pink tide never left because the pink tide was just one chapter of a story that goes back to the very dawn of colonialism.
Yeah.